poor little girl jumps into the sea to save an elderly millionaire who is drowning. But what did his children do? The cobblestone streets of St. Augustine held stories that time insisted on preserving. Among colonial houses with colorful windows and old wooden balconies, life followed its own rhythm, dictated more by the tides than by the hands of the clock. It was a city that breathed by the sea, and everyone there knew how to read the signs it sent. The color of the water at dawn, the smell of the wind before the rain, the movement of boats returning from fishing. In that setting of beauty, almost suspended in time, lived a man whom few truly knew, but whom everyone thought they knew. Mr. Joe was for most just another old man in town, the kind of person you see every day in the same place, doing the same things, and who, for that very reason, becomes almost invisible. He walked slowly through the cobbled streets, always in the same worn linen trousers, and a button-down shirt faded by the sun and repeated washing. His face was marked by deep wrinkles that drew a map of years lived, and his small, clear eyes always seemed focused on something distant, something only he could see. Every day, without exception, Mr. Joe followed the same route. He left home around 5 in the afternoon when the heat began to relent and the sea breeze brought welcome relief. He walked down the main street, greeted Mrs. Connie, who sold savory pies on the corner, passed by the little square where children played tag, and continued to the old pier that jutted out into the sea like a finger pointing to the horizon. There, he always sat on the same worn wooden bench, rested his elbows on his knees, and stared at the water for long minutes that sometimes turned into hours. The residents had their theories about the old man. Some said he talked to ghosts, perhaps with his wife who had passed away years ago. Others thought he simply liked solitude, preferring the company of the sea to the hustle and bustle of the living. There were those who said he was a little crazy, that he stayed there waiting for something that would never come. But no one really knew what was going on in that grey head, in that heart that beat slowly, but still held so much. What no one imagined, what not even his own children fully understood, was that this simple man of modest appearance hid much more than longing and memories. Mr. Joe carried secrets that weighed like stones in his pocket, hurts that pained him more than the rheumatism in his joints, and a fortune that would make many lose sleep if they knew its size. In the past, before becoming the quiet old man of the pier, Joe had been one of the most influential men in the region. Not the kind who appears in newspapers or gives speeches at public events, no. Mr. Joe was the silent, discreet type who worked in the shadows and made things happen without fanfare. He started young, back in the 70s, when St. Augustine was beginning to awaken to tourism, but still maintained its essence as a fishing town. He bought a plot of land here, another there, always paying cash, always negotiating directly without intermediaries. He invested in small local businesses, discreet partnerships in inns that were starting to emerge, stakes in restaurants that became landmarks. Over decades, he built a silent empire. Properties scattered throughout the historic center, land in the rural area, shares in companies that grew with the city. But Joe had a golden rule: never flaunt, never show off. He saw how displayed wealth corrupted people, turned friends into envious rivals, and family members into opportunists. Therefore, he maintained a simple life, modest clothes, and his usual habits. He lived in the same house where he had raised his 3 children, an old but solid construction, with a porch facing a quiet little street and a backyard, with a mango tree that provided generous shade. His wife, Julia, had been his companion on this journey. A woman with an easy laugh and a huge heart who could sing like few others, and who lit up any room she entered. She never wanted luxury, never asked for more than what was necessary. She used to say that the greatest wealth was in mornings spent having coffee together, in afternoons of conversation on the porch, in evenings listening to the sound of the sea. When she passed away, a victim of a disease that progressed too quickly for medicine to do much, Mr. Joe felt as if half of him had gone with her. It was after Julia's departure that he retreated even further. His children were already adults, each following their own path, and he found himself alone in that house full of memories. That's when the pier routine began, that daily ritual of sitting and looking at the sea, as if in the waves he could find some answer to questions he himself couldn't formulate. Gustavo, the eldest of the 3 children, was 45 years old and lived in Key West, where he worked as a manager for a port logistics company. He was a well-groomed man, always clean-shaven and in well-pressed clothes, who spoke confidently and made quick decisions. He had built a comfortable life, a large house, and imported car, children in private school. But he never thought it was enough. He always wanted more, always looked at the neighbor who had something better, always calculated how much more he needed to earn to get where he thought he deserved to be. He visited his father once a month, sometimes less, and when he did, the conversation always ended up drifting to the topic of properties, documents, the family's financial future. Raphael, the middle child, was 42 years old and very different from his brother. He lived in St. Augustine itself, worked as a history teacher at the municipal high school, and led a quiet life. He was married to Fernanda, a dedicated nurse, and they had 2 teenage children. Raphael had always been more sensitive, more focused on emotional issues than on material ones. He liked books, long conversations, understanding people. He visited his father more frequently than Gustavo, but lately he felt torn between loyalty to the old man and the pressure his older brother exerted to resolve what he called family loose ends. Marianne, the youngest, was 38 years old and resembled her mother the most. She had the same affectionate manner, the same calming smile, the same ability to perceive what others felt without them needing to speak. She was an architect, working on restoration projects for historic mansions in St. Augustine, and had a special talent for preserving the old without losing modern functionality. She had been divorced for 3 years without children and divided her time between professional projects and discreet care for her father. She visited his house almost every day, brought food, tidied the kitchen, changed the bed linen. She never asked for anything in return, never inquired about inheritance or a will. She did it because she loved him, simple, as that. But even Marianne, with all her genuine affection, felt the weight of uncertainty. She knew that her father had assets, had properties, had important documents stored somewhere. She also knew that Gustavo was growing increasingly impatient, pressing for things to be resolved while their father was still lucid and present. And Raphael, poor thing, was caught in the middle, wanting to please everyone and ending up satisfying no one. The truth is that in recent months, the tension had increased. Gustavo called almost every week wanting to know if Marianne had found anything, if their father had said anything, if she knew where the important papers were kept. He spoke of succession planning, of organizing documentation, of avoiding future problems. He used technical, rational language as if he were dealing with any business and not his own father. Marianne tried to calm him, saying that everything in its own time, that their father was still well and there was no hurry. But Gustavo insisted. He said that precisely because their father was well, things should be resolved now, calmly, with organization. Raphael tried to mediate, as always. He called Marianne asking for patience with their brother. He called Gustavo asking for understanding for their father. But deep down he also had his own concerns. A teacher's salary was not large. His children were reaching college age, and bills piled up at the end of the month. He wasn't greedy like Gustavo, but it would be a lie to say he didn't think about the future, that he didn't catch himself imagining what it would be like if part of that inheritance could lighten the burden of responsibilities a little. Meanwhile, oblivious, or perhaps very conscious of everything, Mr. Joe followed his routine. He woke early, drank his black coffee without sugar, read the newspaper cover to cover even if the news was always similar, ate little lunch, took his afternoon nap, and around 5 o'clock he was again walking towards the pier. And it was precisely there, on that old piece of wood that extended over the sea, that his life was about to gain a new chapter. Annie was 9 years old and was the daughter of Mrs. Connie, the savoury pie vendor, and Mr. Tony, a fisherman who took on odd jobs to supplement his income. The girl was small for her age, thin, with sun-kissed, skin and brown hair always dishevelled by the wind. She walked barefoot through the city, knew every street, every corner, every resident. She was smart, quick, full of life, but she also had a quiet, observant side. She liked to sit and watch people, imagine their stories, invent conversations they might be having. It was during one of these moments of observation that Annie noticed Mr. Joe for the first time. She was playing near the pier, throwing pebbles into the water, trying to make them skip, when she heard a dry, strong cough. She turned and saw the old man sitting on the bench, hunched forward, coughing with difficulty. Without thinking much, the girl ran to him. She pulled a slightly worn but clean cloth handkerchief from her shorts pocket and offered it to the old man. Mr. Joe looked up, surprised. He wasn't used to receiving attention, much less from a child who didn't even know him. He took the handkerchief, thanked her with a nod, and wiped his mouth. The cough passed. He was about to return the handkerchief, but Annie gestured with her hand, saying he could keep it, that she had another one at home. And then, without asking permission, without ceremony, the girl sat down beside him on the bench. They sat there in silence for a few minutes. She swung her legs that didn't reach the ground, he with his hands resting on his knees, both looking at the sea that changed color as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was Annie who broke the silence. "You come here every day, don't you?" Mr. Joe nodded. "Why?" The question was simple, direct, without malice. A child's question that hasn't yet learned that some things aren't asked. The old man thought for a moment before answering. "I like to watch the sea, it calms me." Annie nodded as if she understood perfectly. "My dad likes it too. He's a fisherman. Says the sea teaches things." "And what does it teach?" the girl thought, frowning in concentration. "Patience. My dad says there's no point being in a hurry with the sea. It does things in its own time." Mr. Joe smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but genuine. It had been a long time since he had smiled like that. "Your father is wise," Annie shrugged. "I don't know, he's just my dad." They stayed there a little longer, exchanging loose phrases about boats, fish, seagulls, clouds, casual conversations, without purpose, the kind that flow naturally like the tide itself. When the sun began to touch the horizon line, Annie jumped up. "I have to go, my mum gets mad if I'm late." Mr. Joe waved. "Be careful." The girl was already running when she turned and shouted, "I'll be back tomorrow." And she did. The next day, there she was again, sitting beside the old man, as if they were old friends. And the next day too, and the next. Gradually, it became a routine. Annie finished her games, her runs around the city, and before going home she stopped at the pier to see Mr. Joe. Sometimes they talked a lot, sometimes they sat in silence. It didn't matter. There was a connection there, something that didn't even need words to exist. Mr. Joe began to wait for her. He would bring a piece of bread, a fruit, sometimes a children's book he had saved from when his children were little. Annie received everything with a huge smile, thanked him, and often shared with him whatever he had brought. The girl never asked where he lived, if he had family, if he had money. She never showed interest in anything beyond his company, and perhaps it was precisely that which touched the old man's heart so deeply. One afternoon, Annie asked about the wife he had mentioned. Mr. Joe was quiet for a moment, his eyes lost at sea. Then he began to speak. He told her about Julia, about how they met at a summer festival, about how she could sing in a way that seemed like she was talking to the wind. He told her about the years. They lived together, about the children they raised, about the plans they made and the dreams they realized. And he also told her about the emptiness that remained when she left, about how the house became too big and too silent. Annie listened to everything with that deep attention that only children have. When he finished, she said something he would never forget. "She must have been very happy with you." "Why do you think that?" "Because you talk about her with affection. You can feel it." Mr. Joe felt a tightness in his chest, but it was a good tightness, the kind you feel when someone truly understands you. He ran his hand through the girl's hair, a paternal gesture he hadn't made in a long time. "You're a smart girl," Annie smiled. "My mom says I'm just nosy." They both laughed. And in that shared laughter, in that simplicity, there was more truth than in many serious conversations Mr. Joe had had with his own children in recent years. Meanwhile, far away in Key West, Gustavo was ending another call with a lawyer. He had consulted 3 in recent months, all basically saying the same thing. As long as their father was alive and lucid, there wasn't much to do without his cooperation. Succession could only be anticipated with the consent and active participation of the asset owner. Gustavo drummed his fingers on the table, impatient. He needed a plan. He needed a way to convince his father to organize everything soon. That's when he had an idea. What if he could gather the 3 siblings, and together they approached their father? Lightly, casually, perhaps at a special moment. They could go for a ride, reminisce about old times, create a conducive environment to bring up the subject, without seeming like pressure. Yes, that could work. He called Raphael, who agreed immediately. He was tired of being caught in the crossfire, and thought a family meeting could be good for everyone. He called Marianne, who hesitated, but eventually agreed. She also felt that something needed to be resolved, if only to calm tempers. The plan was set. They would invite their father for a boat trip, as they used to do when their mother was alive. They would go to a beautiful cove, bring food, have some drinks, talk about life. And at some point, gently, they would bring up the subject of the papers, the will, the organization of assets. Gustavo felt he was in control of the situation. But if there's one thing life teaches, especially in a city like St. Augustine where the sea dictates the rules, it's that not everything we plan happens as we wish. And sometimes, very sometimes, twists come precisely from where we least expect them. That same week, Marianne went to visit her father as usual. She found the house tidy, the bed made, everything in its place. Mr. Joe was in the kitchen having his afternoon coffee. She sat with him, and they talked about pleasantries. Then, while helping to put away the dishes, Marianne decided to look for a dish towel in the bedroom cabinet. That's when, rummaging among old clothes stored in a drawer, she felt something underneath. An envelope. Yellowed with worn edges, sealed with old wax. Her heart raced. Could this be it? The will? The instructions everyone was looking for? She picked up the envelope, weighed it in her hands. It had been there, within everyone's reach all this time, hidden among sheets no one used anymore. Marianne hesitated. She could open it. She was his daughter, she had the right, but something stopped her. Respect, perhaps, or fear that it would change everything irreversibly. She put the envelope back, but the information burned in her mind. That night, she called Gustavo. She said she had found something, but didn't know if it was what they were looking for. Her brother's reaction was immediate. They needed to see it. They needed to know. The boat trip, which was already planned for a few days later, gained new urgency. Mr. Joe, oblivious to everything, continued his routine. But he wasn't foolish. He noticed his children's glances, the indirect questions, the tension in the air. He knew well the sound of the wind changing direction, and felt that something was different. Still, when Gustavo called inviting him for the trip, he accepted. Perhaps out of longing for the times they did it as a family. Perhaps because, deep down, he also wanted to see how far things would go. The night before the trip, Mr. Joe stayed up late. Sitting on the porch of his house, listening to the distant sound of the sea, he thought about many things, about the children he raised, the mistakes he made, the choices he took. He thought about Julia, how she would know how to handle that situation better than he. He thought about Annie, that barefoot girl who had brought back something he thought was lost. The feeling of being loved for who he was, not for what he had. He got up, went inside, and walked to the small office where he kept old papers. He opened a worn notebook where he used to jot down household expenses when Julia was alive, where he wrote phrases she said and wanted to remember, where he noted lessons he wanted to pass on to his children. He picked up a pen, thought for a moment, and wrote in the middle of a blank page, "Not all wealth fits in a safe." He closed the notebook, put it back. He looked out the window at the dark night. Tomorrow would be an important day. He didn't know exactly what would happen, but he felt in his chest that something was about to change. The sea teaches patience, as Annie had said, repeating her father's words. But it also teaches that there are times when the tide turns, and there's no point fighting it. Mr. Joe went to sleep late, but when he finally closed his eyes, he slept deeply. He dreamed of Julia singing on the porch. He dreamed of his children, still small, playing in the backyard, and he dreamed of a barefoot girl, smiling as she threw pebbles into the sea. The morning of the trip dawned with an overly clear sky, the kind that deceives the unwary. Any fisherman in St. Augustine would know how to read the signs: the air too still, the sea too calm, the seagulls flying low. But for those who don't, live by the sea, for those who spend their days in offices and air-conditioned rooms, that was just a beautiful day, perfect for a family outing. Gustavo arrived early at his father's house, driving his silver pickup truck that gleamed in the sun. He brought a cooler full of drinks, sandwiches his wife had prepared, and a wide smile that didn't match the tension in his shoulders. Raphael arrived soon after, coming by bicycle as always, with his old backpack on his back, and that somewhat awkward way of someone never completely at ease at family gatherings. Marianne was the last, driving her small car and already feeling a tightness in her stomach that she couldn't explain. Mr. Joe was waiting for them, sitting on the porch, dressed in his best button-down shirt, a faded blue one that Julia had given him years ago. He watched his 3 children arrive, noticed the slightly forced smiles, the somewhat rushed hugs. He knew those signs well, but he said nothing. He simply stood up, grabbed his old cap, and followed them. Gustavo's boat was docked at the main pier, a medium-sized motorboat, nothing luxurious but comfortable enough for 5 people. He had rented it for the occasion, wanting to impress, wanting to show that he was doing well in life. As they prepared to leave, Marianne noticed something strange. There were only 3 life jackets on the boat. "Where's the 4th life jacket?" she asked, turning to Gustavo. Her older brother didn't even look up, busy adjusting the ropes. "No need for 4. Dad knows how to swim." Marianne frowned. "Gustavo, he's 73 years old. Of course he needs a life jacket. He's lived his whole life in this town. He knows the sea better than any of us. Relax, Marianne." Raphael, who was helping to put the cooler in the boat, paused for a moment. He looked at his brother, then at his sister, then at his father, who was already sitting in the back seat, oblivious to the discussion. He opened his mouth to say something, but closed it immediately. He didn't want to start the day with conflict. He never did. Marianne insisted, her voice rising a tone. "I'll go to the marine supply store and buy another one. Just wait 15 minutes. Gustavo sighed, impatient. "No need. We're just going to Dreamer's Bay. It's very close. Calm water. No risk at all. Stop being neurotic." The word dropped like a stone. Neurotic. That's what Gustavo always called her when she questioned one of his decisions. Marianne felt anger rise but swallowed it. She looked at Raphael, seeking support, but her brother looked away, as always. "All right," she said, her voice controlled but tense. "But if anything happens, it's your responsibility." Gustavo shrugged and started the engine. The noise covered any possibility of further discussion. Marianne got on the boat feeling a weight in her chest that wasn't just anger. It was fear, a fear she couldn't name. At the pier, not far away, Annie had woken up earlier than usual. She helped her mother prepare the morning savory pies, had her weak milk coffee, and went out to play. But instead of running to the beach as she always did, the girl went straight to the pier. She wanted to see Mr. Joe. She couldn't explain why, but she felt a strange need to see him that day. When she got there, the bench where he always sat was empty. Annie frowned, confused. Mr. Joe never missed a day. She sat on the bench to wait, swinging her legs, throwing pebbles into the water. She stayed there for half an hour. An hour. Nothing. That's when she saw the boat leaving the pier. And even from a distance, even with the sun in her eyes, she recognized the curved silhouette sitting in the stern. Mr. Joe. The girl stood up, waving, but they were already too far away to see. There were other people on the boat. 3, from what she could count. It must be his family, she thought. She stood there watching until the boat became a speck on the horizon. Then she returned to the sand, but couldn't concentrate on playing. Something was bothering her, a bad feeling clinging to her chest. On the boat, the mood started light. Gustavo piloted with exaggerated confidence, speeding more than he should, making the boat jump over the small waves. Raphael tried to strike up a conversation about old times, remembering when their mother used to take them fishing for shrimp on the rocks. Marianne remained quiet, looking at her father, who sat in silence, his gaze lost on the horizon. Mr. Joe didn't speak but observed everything. He saw Gustavo controlling the boat with that arrogance of someone who thinks they master things. He saw Raphael trying to please everyone and failing to please anyone. He saw Marianne tense, worried, trying to hold back her emotions. He knew his children well. He knew exactly what moved them, and he also knew why they were there that day. After about 20 minutes of navigation, Gustavo slowed down. They were in a beautiful area, surrounded by green hills, the crystal-clear water reflecting the blue sky. He turned off the engine. The silence that followed was strange, heavy. "What a beautiful place, huh?" said Raphael, forcing enthusiasm. "Remember when we used to come here with Mom?" Mr. Joe nodded but said nothing. Marianne opened the cooler, began to distribute the drinks. Gustavo grabbed a beer, opened it with a snap, drank a long gulp. Then, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, he looked at his father. "Dad, we wanted to talk to you about something." Here it was, the real reason for the trip. Mr. Joe slowly turned to his eldest son, waiting. "It's about the papers," Gustavo continued. "The property documentation, the will, those things. We think it's time to organize all that. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just put things on paper. Make everything clear." Mr. Joe took a sip of the water Marianne had given him. "Why the rush?" Gustavo laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "It's not a rush, Dad. It's planning. You're 73 years old. It's not sensible to leave everything messy. What if something happens? We'd be clueless, the assets would be blocked, it would be a mess." Raphael interjected, his voice softer. "What Gustavo means, Dad, is that it would be good for everyone to have things organized. It doesn't have to be now, but at some point, we need to sit down and look at it." Mr. Joe looked at Raphael, then at Gustavo, then at Marianne, who was quiet, her eyes fixed on her own hands. "And you, Marianne, do you also think it's time?" The youngest daughter looked up, and Mr. Joe saw something in her eyes that moved him. It wasn't greed, it was weariness. Weariness of being the mediator, of holding things together, of trying to keep the peace while her brothers pressured. "I think you should do what you think is best, Dad. In your own time." Gustavo snorted, annoyed. "Of course. Marianne always with her soft talk. The truth is, we need to know things, Dad. We're your children. We have a right to know what will happen to the family's assets." "Assets," Mr. Joe repeated, his voice low. "Is that what matters to you? Assets?" Gustavo slapped his knee, frustrated. "Don't give me that, Dad. You worked your whole life, amassed a lot of things, and now you're making a mystery out of it. That's not fair. We need to know where the documents are, what you've decided, if you've divided it equally among the three of us, or if there's some surprise waiting." The word surprise hung in the air, laden with accusation. Mr. Joe remained silent for a long moment. Then, with that calm that only those who have lived a lot possess, he spoke. "You want to know about the papers? The documents? They are stored in the right place, and they will stay there until I decide it's time." "But, Dad," Raphael began. "No," Mr. Joe cut him off, his voice firmer now. "You come here, take me on this nice trip, pretend it's out of longing, out of affection. But what you really want is to know about the inheritance? Do you think I'm too old to notice?" The silence that followed was cutting. Marianne closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. Raphael looked at his own feet. Gustavo, however, was not shaken. "You're being unfair, Dad. We have a right to worry about the future. That doesn't mean we don't care about you." "Worried about the future or eager for the inheritance?" Mr. Joe retorted. Gustavo felt anger rise. He stood up abruptly, making the boat rock. "You know what? I'm tired of your arrogance. You play the saint, the poor victim, but the truth is you like having this power over us. You like keeping us on edge, knowing nothing." "Gustavo, calm down," Marianne pleaded, her voice trembling. "I won't calm down. He needs to hear this. We're adults, Dad. We have families, we have bills, we have responsibilities. And you're playing hide and seek with the documentation as if we were children." Mr. Joe stood up too, leaning on the bench. His voice came out low, but firm. "You want to know what I've decided? I'll tell you. I've decided that my greatest wealth is not in stored papers. It's in knowing who truly cares about me. And today, here on this boat, I discovered exactly who those people are." "What does that mean?" Gustavo asked, his eyes narrowing. "It means you'll have to wait, and when the time comes, perhaps you'll be surprised by my decisions." It was at that moment that the sky began to change. The clouds that were once just white dots on the horizon now advanced quickly, darkening, thickening. The wind, which had been still, began to blow. The sea, which had been calm, began to get rough. Marianne looked up, alarmed. "I think we'd better go back," Raphael agreed. Immediately. "Yeah, the weather's changing. Let's go." Gustavo, still red with anger, was slow to react. Then, with a jerky movement, he went to the engine. He tried to start it. Nothing. He tried again. The engine sputtered, failed, silenced. "Damn it," he muttered, trying again. The waves began to hit harder against the hull. The boat was rocking now in a movement that was becoming increasingly intense. Marianne held onto the side, fear plastered on her face. "Gustavo, start this engine." "I'm trying." Mr. Joe remained standing, holding onto the bench, watching the sea that was beginning to show its claws. He knew this. He knew how to read the signs. He knew they had stayed too long, that they had ignored the warnings, that now they would have to deal with the consequences. The engine finally caught, but it was different now. The sound wasn't confident as before. It was irregular, failing. Gustavo accelerated, but the boat barely moved against the waves that now came head-on. "Turn aside," Raphael shouted. "You can't go straight against the wave." Gustavo turned the wheel, but with too much force. The boat tilted dangerously. Marianne screamed. Raphael held on wherever he could, and Mr. Joe, who was standing, lost his balance. It all happened very fast and very slowly at the same time. The old man tried to support himself, but his hands slipped on the bench, wet with sea spray. Gustavo, desperately trying to control the boat, made an abrupt movement with his arm to reach the wheel. His elbow hit his father's shoulder. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't on purpose. But it was enough. Mr. Joe staggered backward, tried to hold on to the edge, but the boat rocked hard at that exact moment. And then, before the horrified eyes of his 3 children, the old man fell into the water. Marianne's scream tore through the air. "Dad!" Raphael threw himself to the side of the boat, extending his arms uselessly. Gustavo froze for 2, 3 precious seconds, his brain refusing to process what had just happened. Then he reacted, but his hands trembled so much he could barely hold the rope he was trying to throw. Mr. Joe emerged, coughing, spitting salt water. His heavy clothes pulled him down. He tried to swim, but his 73 years, the shock, the weight of his soaked clothes, everything conspired against him. The waves hit his head, pushing him down, lifting him, drowning him. "The life jacket!" Marianne screamed, hysterical. "He doesn't have a life jacket!" Raphael managed to throw a rope, but it landed too far away. The wind carried it. Gustavo tried to maneuver the boat to get close to his father, but the engine was failing, the waves pushed them, and he was panicking. From the pier, even at a distance, Annie had seen everything. She couldn't explain why she had stayed there, looking at the sea, waiting. But when she saw the boat start to rock strangely, when she saw the figure fall into the water, her heart pounded. Without thinking, without reasoning, moved by an instinct that came from somewhere deep, the girl ran. Her bare feet slapped hard on the pier planks. She called out for Mr. Tony, the fisherman, but he wasn't nearby. There was no time. There was no one, only her. And deep in her 9-year-old soul, Annie knew what she had to do. The girl reached the end of the pier and, without hesitation, jumped. The cold water enveloped her like a violent embrace. For an instant she sank, the weight of her, clothes pulling her down. But Annie had been born there, had grown up swimming in that sea. She knew the currents, she knew the movement of the waves. Her thin arms began to cut through the water with precision, her breathing controlled, her eyes fixed on the spot where she had seen the old man. On the boat, no one had seen the girl jump. They were too busy with their own despair, their own guilt, their own fear. Marianne cried, shouting her father's name. Raphael prayed aloud, something he hadn't done since childhood. Gustavo, pale as a ghost, finally. managed to get the engine working properly, and turned the boat in the direction where his father had fallen. But when they looked, they saw something they couldn't comprehend. A small figure, impossible to be real, swimming strongly towards the spot where Mr. Joe struggled to stay afloat. "There's someone in the water," Raphael shouted, pointing. "It's a child," Marianne whispered, incredulous. Gustavo accelerated, but the waves made it difficult, and then, as if the sea had decided to help or perhaps make it even harder, a wave bigger than the others rose, broke, and covered everything with white foam. When the water calmed for a second, they saw it. Annie had reached Mr. Joe. Her thin arms were around his neck, keeping him above the water. She was shouting something they couldn't hear because of the wind, but she kept swimming, pulling the old man, fighting against the tide that tried to carry them away. That's when Mr. Tony's lantern appeared. The fisherman had heard the screams, had seen his daughter jump, and even though he was a man of almost 60, he had run faster than ever in his life. He jumped into his small boat, started, the old engine that worked more by miracle than by mechanics, and sped off. "Hold on, Annie," he shouted, his voice hoarse with despair. "Dad's coming for you." The girl heard her father's voice, and it gave her strength. She continued swimming, pulling Mr. Joe, who was now semi-conscious, coughing, vomiting water. Her little arms ached, her legs burned, but she wouldn't let go. She wouldn't let go. Tony's boat arrived first. With the agility of someone who had spent his life at sea, he pulled his daughter in, then grabbed Mr. Joe by the arms and, with an effort that made his muscles scream, hoisted the old man into the boat. Mr. Joe fell face down, coughing violently, spewing water from his mouth and nose. Annie, soaked, trembling with cold and effort, knelt beside him, her small hand on the old man's back. "Breathe, Mr. Joe, breathe." Gustavo's boat finally arrived. The three children looked horrified at the scene. Their father there, almost drowned, being saved not by them, but by a 9-year-old girl they didn't even know. Marianne began to cry convulsively. Raphael had his hands on his head in shock. Gustavo was white, his lips trembling, unable to speak. Tony looked at them with a mixture of anger and contempt. "Are you his family?" No one answered. There was no need. What kind of people take an old man to sea without a life jacket? What kind of people do that? The accusation hung in the air, heavier than any anchor. Mr. Joe coughed a little more, then slowly opened his eyes. He saw Annie beside him, soaked, trembling, but smiling with relief. He saw Tony holding the tiller firmly. He saw his 3 children in the other boat, and in their eyes he read everything. Guilt, fear, shame. "Let's go to shore," Tony said. "This man needs care." The 2 boats returned side by side, but the distance between them seemed much greater than the few feet of water. It was an abyss dug by greed, by negligence, by bad choices. When they arrived at the pier, people were already waiting. Someone had seen, someone had warned, and in a small town, news travels fast. Mrs. Connie ran to her daughter, embracing her in a desperate hug. Mr. Joe was helped ashore, supported by Tony and 2 other fishermen. Marianne tried to approach, but her father looked away. That gesture hurt more than any words could. The 3 siblings stood there, wet, lost, watching their father being led away by strangers who showed more care than they had. And at that moment, under the sky that was ironically beginning to clear, each of them understood what they had done, what they had almost caused, and how, perhaps, some things cannot be fixed with just regret. The news of what had happened at sea spread through St. Augustine with the speed that only small towns know. Even before the sun set that day, everyone already knew the story. Old Joe who almost drowned, the little girl who jumped into the water to save him, the children who took their father to sea without a life jacket. The versions varied in details, as always happens when a story passes from mouth to mouth, but the essence remained the same, and it was not at all favorable to Gustavo, Raphael, and Marianne. Mr. Joe was taken to Tony and Mrs. Connie's house, who insisted on caring for him at least that first night. The fishermen didn't even want to hear about letting the old man go home, alone, not after what had happened. They called the town doctor, Dr. Henry, a white-haired gentleman who had been practicing in St. Augustine for 40 years and knew practically all the residents. After examining Mr. Joe, the doctor left the room with a serious expression. Tony and Connie waited in the small living room, where Annie, already dry and wearing clean clothes, slept, wrapped in a blanket on the sofa. "So, Doctor?" Tony asked, his voice low so as not to wake the girl. Dr. Henry took off his glasses, cleaned them carefully before answering. "Physically, he'll be fine. He swallowed a lot of water. His lungs are a little compromised, but nothing a few days of rest and medication won't solve. The problem isn't the body." "What do you mean?" Connie wanted to know. The doctor looked at the room where Mr. Joe was resting, then back at the couple. "He's shaken, and not just by the scare of drowning. There's something deeper. When I asked if he wanted me to notify his children, do you know what he said? He said he had no children, that he was alone in the world." The silence that followed was heavy. Tony clenched his fists, his jaw tense. Those three don't deserve to be called children, taking a 73-year-old man to sea without a life jacket. What kind of people do that? Connie placed her hand on her husband's arm, calming him. "Who knows what goes through people's heads, but one thing I know, as long as he needs it, he has a home here with us." The doctor smiled, a tired but approving smile. "That's the kind of care he needs now. I'll stop by again tomorrow to see how he is. Call me if anything." When the doctor left, Tony went to the sofa where Annie was sleeping. He looked at his daughter, so small, so fragile, and felt a tightness in his chest thinking about the risk she had taken. But at the same time, he felt immense pride. That girl had a heart bigger than her own body. Connie came from behind, hugged her husband. "She's just like you," she whispered. "She can't see someone needing help and stand still." Tony turned, buried his face in his wife's hair, and for the first time in many years, let some silent tears fall. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, inside Mr. Joe's house, the three siblings were gathered. It had been Marianne's idea. After they returned from the sea, after they saw their father being taken away by strangers, they wandered aimlessly, each lost in their own thoughts. That's when Marianne called her siblings and said they needed to talk. They needed to face what they had done. Gustavo arrived last, still in his damp clothes, his hair disheveled. He sat heavily in a chair, avoiding looking at his siblings. Raphael was at the window looking at the dark street. Marianne, standing in the middle of the room, was the one who broke the silence. "We almost killed our father." The words fell like stones. Gustavo shuddered but didn't answer. Raphael turned, his face pale. "It was an accident, Marianne. You saw it. The boat rocked. He lost his balance." "An accident that wouldn't have happened if he had been wearing a life jacket," Marianne cut in, her voice trembling but firm. "An accident that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't taken him on that trip, just to try and extract information about the inheritance." Gustavo finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "It wasn't just for that." "No?" Marianne turned to him, her eyes shining with tears and anger. "Then why was it, Gustavo? Out of longing? Out of love? Because, as far as I saw, all you did today was pressure him, accuse him, demand from him. And when the situation got bad, you froze while he was drowning." Gustavo stood up abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I'm not hating myself right now? I saw our father fall into the water and I couldn't do anything. I stood there like an idiot, and you know. What's worse? A 9-year-old girl did what I should have done. A child was braver, faster, more human than me." His voice broke at the end. Gustavo covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. It was the first time Marianne had seen him cry since their mother's funeral. Raphael left the window, approached his siblings. "We messed up, all three of us. There's no point blaming just one. I was there too. I also saw that there was no life jacket and did nothing. I also pressured Dad. We lost our way, guys. We forgot what really matters." "And now?" Marianne asked, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. "What do we do now?" Gustavo lowered his hands, looked at his siblings with red eyes. "We ask for forgiveness. We try to fix it." Marianne shook her head sadly. "I don't know if it can be fixed, Gustavo. Did you see how he looked at us when he got off the boat? Or rather, did you see how he didn't look? We lost his trust. Maybe we lost him." The three remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts, their own regret. Until Raphael, always, The mediator, always trying to find solutions, said, "Let's try. We'll go there tomorrow, talk to him, explain, ask for forgiveness. Dad is a good man. Maybe he'll understand." Gustavo didn't seem convinced, but nodded. Marianne too. There wasn't much else to do that night besides live with the weight of their own guilt. At Tony and Connie's house, Mr. Joe was awake despite the late hour. Lying in a bed that wasn't his, in a room that smelled of sea and care, he looked at the ceiling and thought. He thought about so many things that his head hurt, more than his body. He thought about his children, how he had failed in raising them. He thought about his wife, how Julia would be sad if she saw what the family had become. He thought about Annie, that brave girl who had risked her own life to save his. Why had she done that? He was nothing to her. She had no obligation whatsoever. But she jumped. Without thinking, without hesitating, she jumped. And in the midst of that turbulent sea, with his strength running out, when Mr. Joe was already beginning to accept that it might be his time, he felt those thin little arms around his neck, heard that child's voice shouting for him to hold on, for him not to give up. And somehow, that had given him the strength to keep fighting. There was a light knock on the door. Mr. Joe turned his head and saw Annie entering the room barefoot with a mug of tea in her hand. "My mum made tea. She said it would help you sleep." The girl approached, handed him the mug. Mr. Joe sat up with difficulty, accepted the tea. It was warm, with a lemon balm flavor, that brought back memories of when Julia used to make it for him on rainy days. "Thank you, Annie." The girl sat on the edge of the bed, swinging her legs. "Are you better?" "I am, thanks to you." Annie shrugged, as if jumping into the sea to save someone was the most normal thing in the world. "I wasn't going to let you drown. We're friends, right?" Mr. Joe felt a lump in his throat. Friend. When was the last time someone called him a friend? When was the last time someone cared about him, not for what he had, but for what he was? "Yes, we are friends." Annie smiled, satisfied with the confirmation. They remained silent for a moment, a comfortable silence, until the girl asked, "Why didn't your children put a life jacket on you?" The question was direct, without malice, but it hurt. Mr. Joe took a sip of the tea before answering. "I guess they didn't think, or they thought it wasn't necessary. But it is. My dad always says everyone needs a life jacket on the boat. It doesn't matter if you know how to swim or not. The sea doesn't forgive. Your father is wise." Annie shook her head. "He was very angry when he found out. Said he was going to talk to your children. My mom had to hold him back." Mr. Joe almost smiled. The idea of Tony, a 5'7" fisherman, lean but pure nerve, wanting to teach his children a lesson was almost comical. But it was also touching. That man, who barely knew him, was willing to defend him. "No need. That's between me and them." "Do you still love them?" Annie asked, with that frankness that only children have. Mr. Joe took a moment to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, laden with emotion. "I do. They are my children. But loving doesn't mean ignoring mistakes. And today I saw many things I would have preferred not to see." "Like what?" "That they care more about what I will leave behind than about who I am. That to them I've become just an obstacle between them and what they think they deserve." "That's very sad," Annie said, and in her voice there was a genuine compassion that warmed the old man's heart. "It is, but it's also revealing. Sometimes we need to go through difficult situations to see the truth of things." Annie thought about this for a moment, then said something Mr. Joe would never forget. "My grandmother, before she left, told me something. She said that people show who they really are when they think no one is looking, or when they're scared. I think your children showed who they are today." Mr. Joe looked at that girl, so young yet so wise, and felt a mixture of admiration and sadness. Admiration for her, sadness for his own children who at twice, 3 times her age, still hadn't learned basic lessons of humanity. "You are special, Annie. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl smiled, stood up. "I'll let you rest. My mom said you need a lot of sleep to get well." When she was already at the door, Mr. Joe called her. "Annie?" The girl turned. "Thank you. Not just for today, for everything. For the conversations on the pier, for the company, for reminding me that there are still good people in the world. Annie smiled, that huge smile that lit up her face. You're welcome, Mr. Joe. That's what friends are for. And she left, closing the door softly behind her. Mr. Joe was left alone in the room, holding the mug of tea, feeling its warmth in his hands. And for the first time in a long time, he cried. Not out of sadness, not out of anger, but out of something more complex. A mixture of gratitude, disappointment, relief, and decision. Because at that moment, in that borrowed bed, in that house of strangers who had become more family than his own family, Mr. Joe made a decision. Early the next morning, Mrs. Connie woke before everyone else to prepare coffee. She found Mr. Joe already awake, sitting on the porch, looking at the sea, which was now calm, as if the events of the previous day had been just a nightmare. Good morning, she greeted him, bringing a cup of fresh coffee. Did you sleep well? I did, better than I expected. Connie sat beside him, also looking at the sea. You know you can stay here as long as you need, right? We have space, we have food, and after what Annie did, it's the least we can offer. Mr. Joe turned to her, touched by her kindness. You and Mr. Tony are good people, but I need to go back to my house. I have things to sort out. Connie nodded, understanding. Your children stopped by last night. Tony didn't want to answer. He said you needed peace. Mr. Joe almost smiled. He was angry? Very. I've never seen my husband so upset, but I calmed him down. No point in more anger, right? What happened, happened. It's true, but what happened also taught me, and now I know what I need to do. Connie looked at him with curiosity but didn't ask. She knew when people needed to keep their thoughts to themselves. Instead, she touched his arm affectionately. Just don't let resentment take over, Mr. Joe. Life is too short to carry so much weight. It's not resentment, Connie. It's clarity. Finally, clarity. Later that morning, Mr. Joe bid farewell to the family who had taken him in. He hugged Connie, shook Tony's hand, and knelt to be at Annie's height. He looked into her eyes and spoke with a firm voice, laden with emotion. You saved me, Annie, and not just at sea. You reminded me that there is still goodness in the world. Never forget what you did. Never let anyone extinguish that light you have inside you. The girl hugged him tightly. You're special too, Mr. Joe. That's why I wasn't going to let anything bad happen. When they finally let go, there were tears in both their eyes. Mr. Joe stood up, adjusted his old cap on his head, and began to walk towards his house. His steps were slow, his body still aching, but there was something different about him, a determination that wasn't there before. Upon arriving home, he found his 3 children waiting on the porch. They stood up when they saw him, their faces marked by a sleepless night, their eyes red, their posture bowed with guilt. Dad, Marianne began, her voice choked. We need to talk. Mr. Joe walked past them without stopping, opened the house door. Come in. It was an order, not an invitation. The 3 followed him, feeling their stomachs tighten. They had never seen their father like that. There was something different about him, something that scared them. Inside the house, Mr. Joe went straight to the point. You want to know about the will? I'll tell you. Dad, it's not about that now, Raphael tried. We just want to apologize for what happened. Mr. Joe raised his hand, silencing him. You will listen to me. You wanted to know so badly. Now you will know. He went to the bedroom, came back with the envelope Marianne had seen days earlier. He opened it right there in front of the 3 of them. Inside were documents, several of them. Deeds, contracts, company shares. Gustavo's eyes widened at the sight of the amount of papers. Mr. Joe spread everything on the table. Here it is, everything I accumulated in 60 years of work. Properties in the historic center, land in the rural area, shares in 3 restaurants, stakes in 2 inns, investments in funds. You wanted to know how much it's worth? It's worth a lot. More than you imagined. Gustavo swallowed hard. Raphael looked at the papers as if they were something forbidden. Marianne had tears silently streaming down her face. And do you know what I decided? Mr. Joe continued, his voice controlled but firm. I decided that you will not have any of this. The silence that followed was absolute. Gustavo went pale. Raphael took a step back. Marianne covered her mouth with her hand. What? Gustavo managed to say, his voice weak. You heard me. Nothing. Not a penny, not a property, not a share. Everything will go to those who truly deserve it, to those who showed they cared about me not for what I have, but for what I am. Dad, please, Marianne began, but Mr. Joe cut her off. Not you either, Marianne. You are better than your brothers, I know that, but you also omitted yourself. You saw that there was no life jacket and didn't insist. You let the greed of others influence you, all of you. Failed. Gustavo found his voice and with it his anger. You can't do this. We are your children. We have rights. Rights? Mr. Joe laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. You gave up your rights when you took me to sea to die. We didn't want you to die, Gustavo shouted. It was an accident. It was negligence. It was greed. It was disrespect. And now you will have to live with the consequences. Mr. Joe began to gather the papers, putting them back in the envelope. You can leave. I don't want you in my house. Dad, Raphael pleaded, tears streaming down his face. We make mistakes. We make big mistakes, but we love you. Let us try to fix it. Some things can't be fixed, Raphael. Go away, before I lose the patience I still have. The three stood there paralyzed until Marianne, gathering all the dignity she still had, waved to her brothers. Let's go, he's right. We don't deserve to be here. They left in silence, heads bowed, defeated. Mr. Joe remained there, alone in the room, holding the envelope, feeling its weight. It wasn't the weight of paper. It was the weight of decisions, of ruptures, of burned bridges. But when he thought of Annie, that brave girl who had risked everything for him, he felt he had made the right decision. Finally, after so long leaving things as they were, he had made a decision. And although it hurt, although it broke his heart to see his children leave that way, he knew it was what needed to be done. Sometimes loving means knowing when to say no. Sometimes loving means letting people face the consequences of their choices. And sometimes loving means having the courage to change everything, even if it means being alone. Mr. Joe sat in the rocking chair that had been Julia's, closed his eyes and let the morning sun warm his face. Tomorrow would be another day, and he had a lot to do. The days that followed were strange in St. Augustine. The whole town commented on what had happened, but no one knew all the details exactly. What was known was that Mr. Joe had thrown his children out of the house, that he had spoken of disinheriting them, and that the little girl Annie had become a kind of local heroine. Mrs. Connie could barely sell her savory pies because people kept stopping to ask about the incident and congratulate her daughter. Annie, for her part, continued her life as always, playing in the streets, running barefoot, smiling at everyone. The only difference was that now, every afternoon before going to the pier to meet Mr. Joe, she stopped by home to pick up something her mother had prepared for him. A plate of food, a piece of cake, a fruit. These were simple gestures, but full of affection. Mr. Joe also returned to his routine, but something had changed in him. He seemed lighter, despite everything. As if removing that weight, as if finally making a decision after so long postponing it, had given him back something that was lost. He continued to go to the pier every day, but now he always brought something to share with Annie. And the conversations between the two became longer, deeper. One of those afternoons, while watching the boats return from fishing, Annie asked something that had been on her mind for days. Mr. Joe, have you thought about what you're going to do with the things you have? The old man looked at her, surprised by the question. Why do you want to know? Annie shrugged. Curiosity, everyone talks about it. They say you're rich, that you have a lot of properties. My mom says it's none of my business, but I kept thinking. And what did you think? That you should give to those who need it. Like there are a lot of people in town who barely have a place to live, or use it to do good things, you know? My teacher said rich people can help a lot of people if they want to. Mr. Joe smiled. That girl never ceased to surprise him. What if I told you I'm thinking of doing exactly that? Annie's eyes widened. Really? Really? But not just that. I'm thinking of doing something more. What? Mr. Joe took a deep breath, looked at the sea, and then told her what he was planning. I have 3 children, Annie, and no matter how much they erred, no matter how much they disappointed me, they are still my children. I can't just erase that. But I also can't reward what they did, so I thought of something different. Annie listened carefully, her eyes fixed on the old man's face. I'm going to divide everything into 4 parts. 3 parts will go to my children, but not in the way they expected. 1 part will become a fund to help needy families in the city. This part will be managed by Marianne, if she accepts. She's always been good at taking care of things, and I think this can give her a greater purpose. And the other parts? The second part will be invested in education. I'm going to create scholarships for children who can't afford a good school. Raphael will manage this part. He's a teacher, he understands this, and who knows, maybe this will remind him of what really matters. Annie smiled, liking the plan, but there was more. The third part will become a project for fishermen, equipment, training, support. Mr. Tony will help me organize this. He knows everyone, knows the needs. And the fourth part? Annie asked. Mr. Joe was quiet for a moment, emotions crossing his face. The fourth part is for you. Annie blinked, confused. For me? For you. For your education. For your future. To ensure that you can be everything you want to be without lack of money being an obstacle. The girl shook her head, almost scared. But Mr. Joe, I don't need that. We don't have much, but we have enough. And I didn't even do anything special. I just jumped in the water because you were going to drown. You just jumped in the water, Mr. Joe repeated, his voice choked. Annie, you're 9 years old. You risked your life to save mine without thinking twice. You did what my own adult children couldn't do. You reminded me that it's still worth believing in people, and that, little one, that is priceless. But your children will be angry. They'll say I stole their inheritance. Let them say the decision is mine, and besides, they'll have their parts too. Only they'll have to work to manage projects that help other people. They'll have to learn to look beyond their own navel. Annie thought about this for a long moment. Then, with that wisdom that didn't match her age, she said, You're giving them a chance to be better. Mr. Joe felt a lump in his throat. Exactly. One last chance. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, until Annie asked, When are you going to tell them? Soon, but first I need to sort some things out. Talk to a lawyer, organize the documents, make sure everything is properly registered. I don't want to leave room for confusion. Can I help with anything? Mr. Joe ran his hand through the girl's hair affectionately. You've already helped more than you imagine. Just by being here talking to me, you help. Meanwhile, in the house Gustavo had rented in St. Augustine to be closer to his father, the 3 siblings were reunited again. They had spent the last few days trying to process what had happened, trying to understand how they had reached that point. Gustavo was visibly shaken. He who had always been the confident, decisive one who took charge of situations now seemed lost. He had called his wife, told her what happened, and for the first time in years had cried on the phone. She had been tough on him, as she should be, but had also offered support. She said he needed to fix it, that he needed to show his father he was capable of being better. Raphael was in an existential crisis. He, the teacher, the scholar who always thought he understood people, couldn't understand how he had let things get to that point. He had talked at length with Fernanda, his wife, who had been brutally honest with him. She said he spent his life trying to please everyone and ended up not taking any stand. That he needed to have a backbone, take responsibility for his choices. Marianne was the one who visibly suffered the most. She blamed herself for not having insisted more about the life jacket, for not having had the courage to confront Gustavo, for having let the fear of conflict speak louder than the instinct to protect her father. She had spent sleepless nights mentally replaying what she could have done differently. It was Marianne who broke the silence. We need to do something. We can't leave things like this. We already tried, Raphael reminded her. He doesn't want to talk to us. Then we try again. and keep trying until he agrees to listen to us." Gustavo, who had been looking out the window, turned around. "What if he never accepts? What if we really lost him?" "Then we'll have to live with it," Marianne said, her voice firm despite her tears. "But at least we'll have tried. At least we won't have given up." Raphael nodded. "Marianne is right. We messed up badly, but we can try to be better. We can try to show him that we've learned." "How?" Gustavo asked, genuinely lost. Marianne thought for a moment. "First, we need to understand what we really did wrong. It wasn't just the life jacket issue. It was everything. It was the greed. It was the disrespect. It was treating him as if he were an obstacle instead of our father. We need to truly change, not just pretend to change." Gustavo sat down, running his hands through his hair. I know that. And the part that hurts the most is that I became exactly what I always criticized in others. I became a person who only thinks about money, about assets. I forgot what really matters." "You can still change," Raphael said. "All of us can." The three stood there, united by guilt, but also by a new determination. They were going to try to fix things, even if it took years, even if their father never fully forgave them. They were going to try to be better. A week after the incident, Mr. Joe called his children for a meeting. He called each of them simply saying he wanted to talk, that he had things to settle. He scheduled it at his own house on a Saturday afternoon. The three arrived promptly, nervous, not knowing what to expect. Mr. Joe received them in the living room where coffee and cake were prepared. A small gesture, but one that did not go unnoticed. At least he had gone to the trouble of preparing something, they thought. Seated, an awkward silence settled until Mr. Joe began to speak. "I called you, here to talk about the future, about what will happen to everything I've accumulated throughout my life." Gustavo opened his mouth to say something, but Marianne touched his arm, signaling him to keep quiet and just listen. "I've thought a lot these past few days," Mr. Joe continued. "I thought about you, about me, about everything we built and destroyed as a family, and I came to some conclusions." He paused, took a sip of coffee, and continued. "All three of you will inherit my assets, but not in the way you imagined." The three exchanged glances, confused. "I'm going to divide everything into 4 parts. 3 of these parts will be yours, but they come with responsibilities, with purposes." And he explained in detail the plan he had told Annie, the fund for needy families that Marianne would manage, the scholarship project under Raphael's coordination, the support for fishermen that would be organized with Tony's help, but with Gustavo's participation in financial management. "You will have access to resources, yes. You will be able to use part of the income for your own needs. But the bulk must be invested in these projects. You will have to work. You will have to get involved. You will have to make a difference in the lives of other people." Raphael was the first to speak, his voice choked. "Dad, this is more than we deserve." "Much more," Marianne agreed. Gustavo was quiet, processing. Then, surprising everyone, he said, "And the 4th part? You said you were going to divide it into 4. Mr. Joe took a deep breath. "The 4th part goes to Annie." The silence was absolute. Gustavo swallowed hard. Raphael's eyes widened. Marianne, however, began to smile through her tears. "The girl who saved me," Mr. Joe explained. "It will ensure her education, her future. It's the least I can do for someone who did so much for me." Gustavo, to everyone's surprise, nodded. "You're right. She deserves it. She deserves more than us." Raphael agreed immediately. "Much more." Marianne wiped her tears. "Can I meet her? I want to thank her personally." Mr. Joe smiled, the first genuine smile he had directed at his children since the incident. "You can. In fact, I'll make sure you do. Maybe you'll learn something from her." It wasn't a malicious criticism, it was a fact, and the three knew. Just in this, the meeting lasted for hours. They talked about the projects, about logistics, about how they would make everything work. But more importantly, they talked about feelings, about regrets, about second chances. It wasn't easy. There were tense moments, moments of crying, moments of heavy silences. But there was also, for the first time in a long time, honesty. When it was getting dark, Mr. Joe invited them to walk to the pier. He wanted them to meet Annie. He wanted them to see where the inspiration for all this had come from. Arriving there, they found the girl sitting on the usual bench, throwing pebbles into the water. When she saw Mr. Joe, her face lit up. "Mr. Joe, I thought you weren't coming today." Then she noticed the 3 people coming behind him. Her smile diminished a little. She became more cautious. "Annie," Mr. Joe said, extending his hand to her, "these are my children, Gustavo, Raphael, and Marianne. I wanted you to meet." The girl looked at the 3 adults, studying them. After a moment, she nodded shyly. "Hi." Marianne was the first to approach. She knelt to be at the girl's height. "Hi, Annie. I wanted to thank you for what you did for my father. You were very brave." Annie shrugged, embarrassed. "I just did what I had to do." Raphael also approached. "Even so, you saved his life. And in a way, you saved us too. You made us see things we were pretending not to see." Gustavo was the last. He approached slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion. "I am responsible for what happened. It was me who didn't put on the life jacket. It was me who pushed for that trip. And you, a 9-year-old girl, did what I should have done. You corrected my mistake. You saved my father while I froze." He paused, wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. "I don't know if you can forgive me, but I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better, trying to be worthy of what you did." Annie looked at him for a long moment. Then, with that disarming simplicity, she said, "Mr. Joe says everyone deserves a second chance. If he forgave you, who am I not to forgive?" Gustavo lowered his head, his shoulders trembling. Marianne placed her hand on her brother's shoulder. Raphael wiped his own tears. And Mr. Joe, observing everything, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days that followed brought changes. Gustavo returned to Key West, but now came to visit his father every week without fail, without a hidden agenda. He began to actively get involved in organizing the project for the fishermen, talking to Tony, understanding the needs, learning to listen. Raphael began working on the scholarship project with an energy he hadn't shown in years. He talked to schools, looked for talented children who needed help, organized fair and transparent criteria. And in the process, he rediscovered why he had chosen to be a teacher. Marianne plunged headfirst into the fund for needy families. She visited homes, talked to mothers, understood needs. She used her experience as an architect to also organize renovations in precarious houses, small improvements that made a big difference. And Annie, well, Annie continued to be Annie, playing in the streets, smiling at everyone, going to the pier every day to talk to Mr. Joe. The difference was that now sometimes one of the siblings was also there. And little by little, very little by little, something like a family began to form. It wasn't the family from before. That one was broken, perhaps forever, but it was a new family, built on different foundations, foundations of respect, honesty, shared purpose. One afternoon, 3 months after the incident, Mr. Joe was at the pier with Annie when Marianne arrived. She brought news about the first family that had received help from the fund. A single mother with 3 children who had now managed to finish renovating her house and start a small sewing business. As Marianne spoke, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, Mr. Joe saw something he hadn't seen in years. He saw purpose. He saw fulfillment that didn't come from accumulated money, but from a difference made. "You're glowing," he told his daughter. Marianne smiled. "I'm happy, Dad. Truly happy. I didn't know helping others could make one feel so good." Annie, who was listening to everything, said, "My grandmother used to say that we are only truly rich when we can share what we have." "Your grandmother was wise," Mr. Joe said. "She was, and I think you are too, because you managed to turn something bad into something good." Mr. Joe looked at the sea, at that infinite horizon that had witnessed so much. He thought of Julia, how proud she would be of what he had done. He thought of his children, how they were finally finding their paths. He thought of Annie, that extraordinary girl who had changed everything. And for the first time in a long time, Mr. Joe felt he was exactly where he should be, doing exactly what he should be doing. "Not all wealth fits in a safe," he had written in the old notebook. And now, finally, he was proving the truth of those words. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink. The boats returned from fishing, the seagulls flew low, the breeze blew softly. And on the old pier of St. Augustine, 3 generations sat together, looking at the same sea, each carrying their stories, their scars, but also their hopes. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not how much we accumulate, but how much we are able to share. Not how many properties we own, but how many lives we touch. Not how long we live, but how intensely we love. And on that orange-skied afternoon, in a coastal town where the sea teaches patience and time passes slowly, Mr. Joe finally understood what Julia had always known. True wealth is not in wills and documents. It is in genuine connections, in acts of courage, in second chances given and taken. It is in a barefoot girl who jumps into the sea to save an old man. It is in children who learn, even if late, the true value of things. It is in every transformed life, in every shared smile, in every moment of true presence. And as the sun disappeared on the horizon, taking another day with it, Mr. Joe closed his eyes and gave thanks. He thanked for the trials that taught him. He thanked for the people who surrounded him. He thanked for still being alive to see the change, to make a difference, to love and be loved. The sea continued its eternal ebb and flow. The waves beat against the pier with their constant rhythm. And in the city of St. Augustine, among cobblestone streets and colourful houses, life went on. A little better, a little more generous, a little more human. Because sometimes all we need is a crisis to see what truly matters. Sometimes we need to almost lose everything to value what we have. And sometimes the greatest inheritance we can leave is not in safes and documents, but in transformed hearts and touched lives. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson Mr. Joe could teach, not through words but through example, not through sermons but through actions. True wealth lies in sowing kindness, in cultivating love, in building legacies that go beyond the material. The old man opened his eyes, looked at Annie, who smiled as she threw another pebble into the water, looked at Marianne, who watched the sunset with peace on her face, and knew he had made the right choices. He had planted seeds that would continue to grow long after he was gone. He had changed the course of a story that seemed destined for tragedy. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. 6 months had passed since that day at sea that changed everything. St. Augustine remained St. Augustine, with its cobblestone streets that told stories, its colourful houses that held memories, and its sea that taught patience to anyone willing to learn. But for Mr. Joe's family, these 6 months had been a journey of profound transformation, the kind that marks the soul and redefines who we are. The 3 projects Mr. Joe had created were flourishing in ways even he hadn't imagined. The Fund for Needy Families, under Marianne's dedicated coordination, had already helped 17 families. It wasn't just money she offered, but complete support. Renovations in dilapidated houses, help to start small businesses, basic food baskets in the most difficult moments, and above all, presence. Marianne had discovered that her true vocation was not just to design beautiful buildings, but to build dignity in people's lives. One September morning, she arrived at her father's house with a sparkle in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. She carried photos on her phone, showing them one by one with contagious enthusiasm. "Look at this, Dad. Mrs. Maria managed to finish renovating her house. Now she has a room just for the girls, and the kitchen no longer floods when it rains. And look at this one. Mr. John opened his mechanic shop. It's still small, but he already has 3 regular clients." Mr. Joe looked at the photos with a proud smile. That was his daughter. The girl he had raised, who had her mother's heart, was finally showing her full potential. "You're doing beautiful work, Marianne. Your mother would be proud." Marianne felt her eyes well up. Her relationship with her father was still in the process of rebuilding. Each conversation was a small bridge being built over an abyss that had almost separated them forever. But they were trying, and that was already a lot. "I think about her every day, Dad, especially when I visit the families. I keep imagining what she would say, how she would act, and I think I'm finally understanding what she always knew, that taking care of others is taking care of ourselves." Mr. Joe nodded, agreeing. Then he asked something that had been on his mind for a long time. "And you, Marianne? How are you feeling?" "Truly?" his daughter thought before answering. She sat in the rocking chair that had been her mother's, looked at her own hands. "I feel useful, Dad. For the first time in a long time, I feel that my life has a greater purpose than just paying bills and accumulating things. And you know what else? I'm sleeping better. That weight I carried in my chest, that guilt that wouldn't let me breathe properly, is getting lighter." She paused, wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. "It doesn't completely disappear," she admitted. "I don't think it ever will. What we did, what almost happened, will be marked forever. But now at least I can look in the mirror without feeling disgusted with myself." Mr. Joe stood up, went to his daughter, and placed his hand on her shoulder. "True regret is not just the kind that hurts. It's the kind that transforms. And you are transforming, daughter. You are becoming the person you always had the potential to be." On the other side of town, Raphael was at the municipal school where he taught, but he wasn't giving a lesson. He was in a meeting with 5 families whose children had been selected to receive the first scholarships from the project. The children, aged between 10 and 15, looked at him with a mixture of shyness and hope that tightened his heart. The scholarship project had started small, but Raphael had dedicated himself body and soul. It wasn't just about paying for private school. He followed up with each student, talked to teachers, organized tutoring when necessary, ensured they had materials, uniforms, transportation. He had become almost a tutor for each of them. "Mr. Raphael," said one of the mothers, a woman in her 50s who worked as a domestic helper, "you can't imagine what this means to us. My little Peter was always a good student, but I never had the means to pay for a better school. Now he has the chance I never had." Raphael felt a lump in his throat. Peter was a 13-year-old boy, quiet but attentive, who devoured books as if they were food. He had the potential to go far. He just needed an opportunity. "That's what we're here for, Mrs. Alzira, to provide opportunity. But I want to make one thing clear. The scholarship comes with responsibilities. The children need to dedicate themselves, maintain their grades, have good attendance, and you parents need to follow up, be present in their education." "Don't worry, teacher," said Mr. Anthony, father of one of the selected girls. "We'll do our part. God knows we will." After the families left, Raphael remained alone in the room, looking out the window at the schoolyard where other children played. He thought about how close he had come to losing everything out of greed, out of weakness, and how now, doing that work, he felt he was finally on the right path. His phone rang. It was Fernanda, his wife. "Hey, love, how was the meeting?" "It was beautiful, Fern. You should have seen the eyes of those children. It's a huge responsibility, but it's also a huge joy." Fernanda laughed on the other end of the line. "You're different, you know? Lighter. More yourself." Raphael smiled. "I'm finding myself. I think I got lost at some point, but I'm coming back." In Key West, Gustavo was in a very different meeting, sitting in a room with Tony, 2 other experienced fishermen, and an accountant. He was reviewing the numbers for the Fisherman Support Project. They had managed to buy new equipment for 3 boats, organize a course on sustainable fishing techniques, and were negotiating with local restaurants to create a cooperative that would guarantee fair prices for fish. Gustavo had visibly changed. He, who used to only wear expensive suits and polished shoes, was now in a simple shirt and jeans. He had sold the imported pickup truck and bought a more modest car. And more importantly, he had started to listen more and talk less. "Mr. Tony," he said, looking at the fisherman who had saved his father, "I wanted your honest opinion. Does this cooperative plan we're setting up make sense to you?" Tony, who had initially been cold and distant with Gustavo, now treated him with cautious respect. The man was genuinely making an effort, it was visible. "It does, Gustavo. We've always had a problem with middlemen who pay peanuts for the fish and then sell it at a high price. If we can sell directly to the restaurants, everyone wins. We earn more, the restaurants pay less than they would to the middleman, and the customer eats fresher fish. Then let's go for it. I'll contact a few more restaurants this week. And I wanted to propose something. How about we do a launch event for the cooperative, invite the community, the local press, show off the project?" The fishermen exchanged glances, surprised but interested. It could be good for visibility, one of them agreed. After the meeting, when everyone had left, Tony asked to speak with Gustavo, alone. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Gustavo nodded, a little apprehensive. "Why are you doing this? And don't give me any talk about project responsibility. I want to know the truth." Gustavo took a deep breath. He looked out the window at the sea that had almost taken his father. "Because I spent my whole life focused on the wrong things, Tony. I measured my worth by the size of my bank account, by the car I drove, by the house I lived in. And on the day it mattered most, when my father needed me, I froze. I was unable to do the basic thing, take care of him." He paused, his voice getting lower. "Your daughter, a 9-year-old girl, was more of a man than I was that day. And that broke me. It showed me that I was nothing of what I thought I was. So now I'm trying to be different. I don't know if I'll succeed. I don't know if what I broke can be fixed. But I have to try." Tony was quiet for a moment, studying Gustavo's face. Then, to his surprise, he extended his hand. "Every man deserves a chance. To be better. You're taking yours, I respect that." The handshake was firm, significant. It was an incomplete forgiveness, a cautious acceptance, but it was a beginning. That afternoon, as had become customary, Annie was at the pier waiting for Mr. Joe. The girl remained the same, playful and full of life, but something was different too. She was more confident, talked more about the future. Mrs. Connie had told Mr. Joe that Annie now spent hours reading, that she had discovered a love for learning, that she dreamed of becoming a marine biologist to study the ocean she loved so much. When Mr. Joe arrived, she ran to hug him as she always did. "Mr. Joe, guess what?" "What, little one?" "I got a 10 on my science test. The teacher said my essay on the marine ecosystem was so good, she's going to show it to the other classes." Mr. Joe felt his chest swell with pride. That extraordinary girl was soaring, and he had the honor of helping her do it. "Congratulations, Annie. You are brilliant." The girl blushed, embarrassed by the compliment. Then she pulled Mr. Joe by the hand. "Come, I want to show you. Something." She led him to the end of the pier, pointed to the crystal-clear water. "See there? That school of silvery fish?" Mr. Joe looked, saw the shimmering movement beneath the surface. "I see them. They're young mullet. My dad taught me to recognize them. In a few years they'll migrate, they'll travel hundreds of miles. Isn't that incredible? These tiny fish will cross the ocean." She spoke with such enthusiasm, such passion, that Mr. Joe could only smile. "It's very incredible, just like you." Annie turned to him, curious. "Why?" "Because you're also starting your own migration. You're discovering who you are, where you want to go. And you'll go far, Annie, very far." The girl became serious for a moment, then asked something she had been holding for weeks. "Mr. Joe, you're not going away, are you? Like, you're not going to leave like Julia left?" The old man felt a pang in his heart. He knelt with difficulty to be at her height, held her little hands. "Everyone leaves sometime, Annie. That's how life works. But I'm not going anywhere now. I still have plenty of time to be here, watching you grow, watching you shine. Promise?" Mr. Joe hesitated. He didn't want to make promises he couldn't guarantee, but looking into those eyes full of fear of losing another friend, he couldn't help but say, "I promise to do everything in my power to stay here as long as I can, to see you graduate, to see you achieve your dreams." Annie hugged him tightly, burying her face in his chest. And there, in that embrace from a 9-year-old girl who had saved his life in more ways than she imagined, Mr. Joe felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt needed. He felt loved for who he was, not for what he had. A few weeks later, Mr. Joe organized a lunch at his house. He invited his 3 children and their respective families. He invited Tony, Connie, and Annie. He wanted to gather everyone. He wanted to create a moment of unity. Marianne arrived early to help prepare. Gustavo brought his wife and 2 teenage children who were enchanted by the historic city. Rafael came with Fernanda and their children, excited to spend time with the grandfather they had seen so little of in recent years. When everyone was gathered, The house that had been silent and empty for months exploded with life. Voices mingled, laughter echoed, children ran through the backyard. Annie immediately got along with Raphael's children, showing them the best trees to climb and the best hiding places to play. In the kitchen, Connie and Gustavo's wife exchanged recipes while preparing the salad. On the porch, Tony and Raphael talked about fishing and education, discovering they had more in common than they imagined. Gustavo was in the backyard pushing his granddaughter on the swing he himself had hung that morning, rediscovering the simple pleasure of making a child smile. Marianne watched everything from the window, tears in her eyes. Her father came from behind, placed his hand on her shoulder. "Is everything all right?" She turned, wiping her tears with a smile. "It's more than all right, Dad. It's perfect. Look at this. Family gathered, laughing, living. 6 months ago I thought I had lost all this forever. But you didn't lose it. We didn't lose it. We almost lost it, but we didn't." "It was too close," she said, her voice choked. "It was. But you know what I learned, Marianne. Sometimes we need to get close to the precipice to understand how much we want to stay away from it. Sometimes almost losing everything is what teaches us to value what we have." Marianne hugged her father, and for the first time since the incident, the hug carried no guilt or apology. It was just a hug, from daughter to father, from person to person, from heart to heart. During lunch, while everyone ate and talked, Mr. Joe asked for attention. The conversation stopped. Everyone looked at him. "I wanted to thank everyone for being here today. This house spent months silent, and today it's alive again. And that means more to me than you can imagine." He paused, looking at each person around the table. "We went through something difficult, very difficult, and for a while I thought I had lost my family. But what I discovered is that I didn't lose it. The family I had before, perhaps, but I gained a new one. A family built not only by blood, but by choice, by effort, by transformation." He looked at Gustavo. "You are learning that success is not measured in money, but in lives touched." To Raphael. "You are discovering that mediating does not mean avoiding positions. You are finding your voice." To Marianne. "You are finally using your talents not only to create beautiful things, but to build dignity." Then he turned to Tony, Connie, and Annie. "And you reminded me that family is not just those who are born together. It's those who choose to be together, who care when no one asks, who save when no one expects." His gaze finally rested on Annie, who looked at him with those big, attentive eyes. "Especially you, little one. You saved me in more ways than you know. You saved me at sea. But you also saved me from bitterness, from despair, from the feeling that there was nothing good left in the world." Annie blushed, but smiled. "It was just jumping in the water, Mr. Joe. It was much more than that. It was an act of pure love. And pure love is the rarest and most valuable thing there is." Gustavo cleared his throat, emotional. "Dad, I wanted to say something too." Everyone looked at him. "I spent my whole life trying to impress you, trying to show that I was successful, that I had achieved things. But in the process, I lost what really mattered, and I almost lost you." His voice faltered, but he continued. "I can't go back and change what I did. I can't erase that day, but I can try to be different from now on, and that's what I'm trying to do. Not to impress anyone anymore, but because I finally understood that the kind of man I want to be is not measured by what I have, but by how I treat people." Raphael also spoke. "And I have to admit that I spent my life afraid of conflict, afraid of displeasing, and in the end, that lack of stance almost cost your life. I'm learning that sometimes we need to be firm. We need to take a stand, even if it causes discomfort." Marianne was the last. "I always wanted to be the bridge between everyone, the one who kept the peace. But I learned that true peace doesn't come from avoiding conflicts. It comes from facing them with honesty and love. And that's what I'm trying to do now. Not just with family, but with life." Mr. Joe looked at his 3 children, saw in them no longer the people they had been, but the people they were becoming. And he felt proud, A different kind of pride than he had felt when they earned diplomas or jobs. A deeper pride. The pride of seeing human beings transform into better versions of themselves. The lunch extended into the afternoon. The children played, the adults talked, and there was a lightness in that space that hadn't existed for months. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkward silence. There were still scars that hurt when touched. But there was also hope, and genuine effort, and love that, despite everything, still existed. When the sun began to set, Annie pulled Mr. Joe by the hand. "Shall we go to the pier to watch the sunset? Let's go." And off they went, followed by the whole family who wanted to join. They walked through the cobblestone streets of St. Augustine, that city that had witnessed stories for centuries. And when they reached the pier, they found what they always found there, the infinite sea, the sky painted with impossible colors, and the certainty that, despite all the errors and successes, life continued. Mr. Joe sat on the usual bench, Annie beside him. The others, they stood around, some sitting, others standing, all looking at the same horizon. And in that moment of shared silence, each one thought about their own journeys, their own transformations. Gustavo thought about how he had exchanged false values for true purpose. Raphael thought about how he had found his voice. Marianne thought about how she had discovered her heart. Tony and Connie thought about how their daughter's kindness had created waves that reached far beyond what they imagined. And Annie, well, Annie thought about mullet migrating across the ocean, about dreams of studying marine biology, about how life was full of possibilities when you had people who believed in you. Mr. Joe didn't think about anything specific. He simply felt. He felt gratitude for being alive, for having a second chance, for being surrounded by people who, each in their own way, made his life richer. And he understood finally, completely, that this was the true inheritance he would leave. Not properties or money, but transformed lives, lessons learned, shared love. The sun touched the horizon, painting everything golden. And in that perfect moment in that coastal city where the sea taught and time healed, Mr. Joe closed his eyes and gave thanks. He thanked for the trials that strengthened him. He thanked for the people who surrounded him. He thanked for still having time to love, to see, to be part of something greater. Because in the end, that is the only wealth that matters. The wealth of shared moments, of witnessed transformations, of love that persists even when tested. And this wealth, unlike any other, only grows when it is shared. It only multiplies when it is given. It only becomes real when it is lived. And there, on that old pier of an ancient city, surrounded by an imperfect but trying family, by an extraordinary girl who had saved more than a life, Mr. Joe was finally at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real, honest, true. And that, after all, was all he ever wanted.